Today I'm braving the wind and the rain in Southern California because I've finally been able to drive the all-new Chevy Colorado, what I think is the best deal in the pickup truck segment in North America. This is the close relative, of course, to the GMC Canyon. So if you want to know how that GMC is going to drive, stay tuned because it's going to be basically the same as this Colorado, except that there's more differentiation in this generation than ever before. Not only are the Colorado and the Canyon going to look different, the Canyon is certainly focused on being a more premium mid-size pickup truck. So it's not going to come with the same standard engine we find in this, but there are a decent amount of features that overlap between the two models. Obviously, I'm going to talk about pricing a bit more in the video, but one of the most important things to know about the Colorado is that it starts definitely less than a lot of the competition. $29,200 plus destination will buy you the work truck version. It's not going to look quite like this Z71, but I have spent a lot of time in that base model. You'll get a body colored section down here lower on the bumper and halogen headlights. Now for that low sticker price, you get the same engine essentially as we find in this model, only lower output. And we have the same cab that we find in this model. That's different than we find in, say, a Nissan Frontier, where you get a smaller cab in the base model, and that bigger cab model, it's going to be more expensive than the Colorado in base format. So, as always, remember that there are going to be trade-offs for things like that. On that base model, we find those halogen headlights, not full LEDs like we find in this model, although this one still has incandescent turn signals. You also won't find fog lights of any description. But I think that's a worthwhile trade, because you can always upgrade the headlights yourself, but some of the features we find standard on the inside of that base model would be much more difficult to upgrade yourself aftermarket. For the launch of the Colorado, Chevy is really focusing on the more off-road oriented trims, like this Z71 trim and the Trail Boss that I spent the earlier part of the day in. Both have an air dam at the bottom that is removable, so if you want to go a little bit further off the beaten path, you should definitely do that, although it's going to sacrifice fuel economy a little bit. An interesting twist is that the lower portion of the bumper and the skid plates is interchangeable with the upcoming ZR2 version of the Colorado. So if you want to pull off some of the front end components, put the ZR2 components on, or you just wanted to take off the air dam and put on the skid plates, you can do that yourself for less than the ZR2. For 2023, all Colorados are going to be approximately the same length, about 213 inches long. There is some minor variation based on the trims because the bumper does change around a little bit, but they're all going to be basically as you see right here, with this bed and this big cab in front of it. That again is a little different than Frontier, which has a smaller cab available, and of course the Toyota Tacoma. The reason that Chevy did this is pretty logical. The most popular way to get a mid-sized truck in America is as we see it here, with more or less 4 full-size doors and the somewhat smaller bed in the back. It's still pretty practical. You could still put 8-foot items in your Colorado. It's just that they're going to hang out the back a little bit. And at 213 inches approximately long, this is about the same length as some formats of half-ton trucks. So any longer than this and it would be a bit harder to park. We obviously don't know what the future holds for the Toyota Tacoma. I wouldn't be surprised since it's the best-selling model if it was one of the only ways to get a smaller cab in a mid-sized truck in America. But sales of those small cabs are really quite small, which is why Chevy decided to go in this direction, and we're unlikely to see a smaller cab version of the next generation Ranger. Moving to the back, it's pretty typical pickup truck design. Partial LED tail lights, the brake lights and the turn signals, those are regular incandescents, but this accent strip is an LED. We get well integrated steps right here on the side. That's a practical touch. Parking sensors, metal bumper in the back, 2-inch receiver right there, 4 and 7-pin wiring harness connections. Kind of another interesting twist for, obviously affordability reasons, is that the license plate light, that is incandescent, even though we do get some LED accents in this trim. Tailgate, that is damped in this model, but not all trims will have the damped tailgate. All trims, however, will get a plastic backing on here, and you can get a spray-in bed line, no composite beds. Standard in this trim, but optional in others, is an ingenious storage area located right here in this area of the tailgate. It does have a watertight seal on it, but I'm not entirely clear how watertight it is, so you probably don't want to put your cotton candy in there or anything. We have a small ruler design. It's hard to see in the wet here, but there is a ruler design right there at the edge of the tailgate, and it's pretty easy to open and close. As you'd expect in a new truck, we have an engine that is new to the Colorado, but not new if you're worried about such things, because this has existed under the hood of the Silverado for a little bit. It's a 2.7-liter 4-cylinder turbocharged engine available in 3 different power levels. LT and WT are going to get the low power version standard, 237 horsepower, 259 pound-feet of torque. Z71 and the Trail Boss are going to get this tune, 310 horsepower, 390 pound-feet of torque. ZR2 is going to get the most powerful version, 310 horsepower, 430 pound-feet of torque. But what's interesting about this engine lineup is that all three power versions are available in the base versions of the truck. So if you want a work truck and you want rear-wheel drive with 430 pound-feet of torque, you can do that in the Colorado. That's a really interesting twist. Now, some folks had asked this, the base version of the engine is lacking a few things that we find in the mid-level and the top-end version of the turbo. So you cannot upgrade the power output from 237 up to 310 horsepower. But if you get the mid-grade version of this engine, then there is going to be a software update available to get you all the way up to 430 pound-feet of torque. Now, at this point in time, I don't know fuel economy numbers for this engine just yet, so stay tuned. They're coming out soon. But my guess is that the most efficient versions of this truck are probably going to come in around 25 or 26 miles per gallon. The mission for this engine lineup was for the base engine to be more efficient than the four-cylinder engine it replaced, more powerful in terms of horsepower than the V6, so check there, and more torquey than the diesel engine that was formerly available in the Colorado. That diesel, it's no longer available. If you want to tow with your midsize pickup truck, Chevy says that the Colorado is going to be class leading, offering up to 7,700 pounds of towing capability with either the mid-grade engine or the upper level tune of the 2.7 liter turbo. Now, if you get the ZR2, the most off-road capable version, then towing capacity does drop down to 6,000 pounds, but that's still pretty healthy. That's mainly because of the suspension changes for that more off-road capable truck. Now, there is a lower tow rating, of course, for the base version of the 2.7. So if you want to tow those heavier weights, if you really want to be towing over 5,000 pounds, you should opt for the mid-level engine tune or the upper end one. But again, both of those are available even on the base rear-wheel drive work truck. For this generation of the Colorado, GM decided to make a surprising number of variations. There are two different widths, this is the wider version, and there are 4 different ground clearance numbers. WT and LT get 7.9 inches of clearance. This Z71 bumps things up to 8.9 inches of ground clearance. The Trail Boss goes even further, up to 9.5 inches of ground clearance. And if you want 10.7, then you want the upcoming ZR2. Also an interesting twist, they moved this to the same bolt pattern and wheel offset that we find in the Silverado. So if you like some Silverado wheels more than what's available here, you can swap those in easily. And that doesn't just apply to factory wheels, of course. It means that the aftermarket wheel portfolio open to the Colorado and Canyon is now going to go to the next level because it's shared with the half-ton line. After spending a day in the Colorado, I found the driver's seat to be quite comfortable. This is a multi-way power driver's seat in this model with 2-way adjustable lumbar support, and this trim also has the tilt telescopic steering column. Not all versions of the Colorado will get the steering column that telescopes, but they will all tilt. Now, even in this trim, the front passenger seat is not powered, and it is a little bit differently shaped as far as the seat bottom cushion and its position relative to the ground. If you're a taller person than I am, I'm 6 feet tall, you might want to get a half-ton truck over really anything in the midsize segment. This seating position is certainly more comfortable than the arms and legs stretched out position that you'll find in the Tacoma, but headroom is not as generous as you might think. Sitting in this seat with the seat bottom cushion all the way on the ground, I have about 3/4 of an inch of headroom left. Now, this model does have the power moonroof, and if you delete that option, you will get a bit more headroom, but if you're 6'4", 6'5", you might find the front seats to be a little bit tight. Jumping into the back seat, again, all versions of the Colorado come in this larger cab format, so we certainly have more room back here than in the smaller cabs that are available, but obviously less than you'd find in a half-ton truck. With this front seat comfortably adjusted for me, I have about 2.5 inches of legroom left. It would be kind of a squeeze to put child seats in here. Moving over to the middle seat position, it's obvious that this is not as wide as a Silverado. In terms of the interior dimensions, almost all the trucks in this segment are pretty comparable, except for the ridgeline. It is a little bit wider in some areas. Now, scooting all the way over to the right side of the cab, my knees are almost touching, but not quite touching this seat back. This is all the way back in its tracks. What is a problem for taller passengers in the rear is going to be headroom. If I put my head back to the headrest, my head is definitely touching the ceiling there. But if I'm sitting in a more normal seating position rather than trying to rest my head there, I have about 2 inches of headroom, just due to the way the ceiling is shaped. A lot of folks were asking about the base trim, so let's take a look at the interior in this Trail Boss model because it shares the majority of the interior components with the base WT trim. And that's a pretty good thing for the Colorado because this has a fairly attractive interior. We have a 2-tone fabric upholstery in this model with black sections on the outside that medium gray right there in the middle. Some of these plastics get upgraded in the Z71, which I'm going to show you in a second. In this model, we have a fairly hard but rubbery armrest right there, so not heavily padded or anything like that, and surprisingly little storage in the doors. They likely did this to make the interior feel a bit wider and roomier, but it means that we have a bottle holder down there that's fairly small, and then this really tiny little cubby right there just below that armrest section. I'm not quite sure what you could put there. Moving on over to the dashboard, the same sort of shapes are going on in this and the upper end trims, but this is all made from hard plastic, just as you'd expect on the dashboard for a vehicle that starts under $30,000. Down here we have a fairly large bin-style glove compartment. It's not damped. You can see it just flops right open like that. I don't mind that too much because we get big screens in the dashboard. This just over 11-inch touchscreen infotainment system is standard, as is this 7-inch instrument cluster. The infotainment system is running basically the same version of the software that we find in the updated Silverado for 2023. It features CarPlay, Android Auto integration, built-in mapping. This is standard on even the base work truck model, and that really is kind of a cool feature. Now, obviously, you're going to have to pay for data services in order for some of those things to function, but I like the fact that this software is standard on every version. We also get some cool off-road screens there if you choose the four-wheel drive model. Again, we are in the Trail Boss trim. You can tell this is one of the lower-end models because we have manual climate control here. These are the climate control buttons, fan, and then temperature there. There is a physical volume knob. It's over here on this side. Engine start-stop. Keyless Go is standard on all models. Down here we have some toggle switches for various functions. Auto engine start-stop there, the hazard lights, lane centering assist, USB inputs for the infotainment system, USB-C and regular USB. No wireless charger or anything like that, but a decent amount of storage space. This is the drive mode selector. You rotate it around and then you get really cool animations nicely done there up top for the drive mode. On the surface of the buttons, we have the controls for the four-wheel drive system, auto, 2 high, 4 high, and 4 low. I like the fact that this has an auto button. That definitely makes it a lot more usable for folks that might need occasional extra traction. Pretty traditional shifter right there. Gear change buttons on the side, electric parking brake, 2 decently sized cup holders there in the middle. You can see some drinks right in there at the moment. This padded armrest is much more thickly padded than what we find on the doors, and under it we find a somewhat small storage bin. There's a little tray there, and then a deeper storage well underneath. You probably could not fit half gallons of milk in there. The 7-inch LCD cluster does seem a little bit small inside this binnacle, but I love the fact that this screen is standard, and it's really well featured for a base LCD screen here. We have just that simple layout. We have one where you have a tachometer right there. We also have trip information, just as you'd expect, and then output from your smartphone. The steering wheel is a 4-spoke design. You can see that this is the urethane steering wheel, not the leather-wrapped model. On the face of the steering wheel, we have controls for the cruise control system. This does kind of look like an adaptive cruise control button, but this doesn't have that feature. It's just the gap adjust for the auto braking system. You can see that right there in that multifunction cluster. This is the button that controls that multifunction cluster. You can cycle through the different views there. You can also toggle around options with this toggle. That mainly has to do with things like radio favorites and your radio input. There's also a phone button there, voice command button, and then we get the latest stocks from General Motors. You'll also find these in some of the new Cadillac models. That's the push to wipe button, and then these are wiper controls. You'll notice that we don't have any headlight controls over here on this side of the vehicle. That's because in a very modern twist, Chevy's actually putting them only in the infotainment system. Auto headlamps are standard, and the vehicle of course defaults to auto, but you can also turn on the parking lights or the headlights if you want to right there, but it is in the infotainment system rather than having a separate control. The dimmer control for the dash is actually a physical button, and it's over here to the left of the steering wheel. You can see that just below that we have the same trailer brake controller that we find in the rest of GM's truck lineup. And in case you're wondering, the rear window is manual. Jumping into the Z71 interior, we have a pretty standard sized moonroof over the driver and front passengers' heads. Brian's rocking out to his tunes back there, so that gives you an idea of what kind of headroom we have there in the rear for slightly shorter people. We have the leather upholstery in this model with attractive red accents. I do like that design, and these seats are both heated and ventilated. Moving over to the front doors, we have upgraded plastics, but not upgraded storage. So the same size cubbies there. We have a sort of rubbery coating to that section, more of a soft touch armrest, and then a soft touch insert right there. Bigger changes happen on the dashboard where we have more premium materials here than we found in the base versions of the truck. This is kind of a rubbery wetsuit-like texture here. Red stitching there to help dress things up, and of course piano black. Every manufacturer seems to love piano black these days. We get the exact same infotainment system in the middle of the dashboard, but more buttons going on here because we do have dual zone automatic climate control, heated and ventilated seats over there. More toggles down here. These are really cool, actually. This button lowers all the windows, and then this one over here is an auxiliary switch. I love the fact that we get one in this interior, although I have to say I kind of would like 2 auxiliary switches rather than that window down button. We get a Qi wireless charging mat there that we don't find in that other base model. Basically the same all-wheel drive system controller there. Piano black going on there as well. That definitely is going to scratch easy, so be careful there. Slot for your cell phone, things like that. And then moving over to the instrument cluster, it is, hey, you guessed it, exactly the same also. If you get the ZR2, then we do find a larger, about 12-inch LCD instrument cluster over here. And then, of course, if you get the GMC Canyon, that's going to be available in different trims as well. That GMC Canyon's also going to have an available heads-up display, which does not happen in this model. Obviously, we should start out our drive on a mild trail. This is not an overly technical trail, but it really, I think, highlights the drivetrain of the new Colorado, where we have that 2.7-liter turbocharged engine standard. There's not only a lot of torque out of this engine, up to 430 pound-feet of torque. Even in this mid-output form, just under 400 pound-feet of torque is still very impressive, but lots of torque happens at very low RPMs. And that's thanks not just to the design of the turbocharger in this vehicle, but also the fact that we have a slightly larger displacement than, for instance, we find in the Ford Ranger. You'll really notice that low-end torque out on trails like this. You don't have to be in 4 low to get decent, steady forward progress because we have so much low-end torque. This can just hang out in higher gears and just rev that turbo up a little bit and give you the kind of torque that you're expecting. I don't have official torque plateau specifications for this engine, but it feels like it's right around 1500 when all of it comes onto the boil, and General Motors said it stays pretty consistent all the way up to about 5000 RPM. If you're more of an occasional off-roader, you might not even need lockers because we have the same sort of terrain mode software that we find in some of GM's larger trucks. The software is accessed by that terrain management knob right here in the center console. The system works with the traction management system in the vehicle. It's obviously not going to do anything as far as front power bias because we're locked in for high right now, so it's essentially 50-50, but it is going to work to direct power left to right wherever it's needed in the vehicle, and also integrates with the brakes, giving us an auto stopping and deceleration function. So if I lift my foot off the brake pedal, it's sort of like one pedal drive. It's going to take us to a complete stop relatively aggressively and hold you there. Whether you're going up a hill or down the hill, it's going to keep you from slipping and sliding. It's really going to direct power around where it's needed. It works incredibly well. This is the kind of vehicle where as long as you're just romping on, rock climbing for miles and miles, you probably aren't going to have to worry about overheating the brakes, and you also won't have to worry about the complications of locking axles. Now, if you are on a longer trail, keep in mind that this kind of brake-based system, you can end up with brake overheating on some of those longer, more really aggressive trails, etc. So those are the kind of situations where you're probably going to want to wait for the ZR2. Now it's time to get the Colorado out on the road. I'm not driving the most powerful version of this 2.7-liter turbo, but it is still pretty peppy. This is the mid-grade trim, gives us the same horsepower as the high-output version, but just under 400 pound-feet of torque. It's really interesting that General Motors has decided to consolidate on one engine in the Colorado, but I think they chose exactly the right engine for this. Now, I don't have any official 0 to 60 times from Chevy or for this model just yet. We're up here at altitude in Southern California, and it has been very, very wet and very windy, so you're gonna have to wait until I can get this at home for those official 0 to 60 and 60 to 0 times. But I suspect this is gonna be decently below 7 seconds 0 to 60. This is likely gonna be one of the quickest entries in this segment. Whether or not it's the fastest, that will really depend on the options and the trim level you select, because as with full-size trucks, there are a decent number of options and different ways to get your Colorado. A lot of that will affect your 0 to 60 time, especially tire and wheel choice, things like that, and the trim level, etc. Now, obviously, the base 2.7-liter turbo is a lot less powerful than this. So 0 to 60 time in the base version is probably going to be a little bit slower than something like the Nissan Frontier that has about 300 horsepower standard in that model. But actually, torque figures are going to be substantially similar. So that's one of the advantages of having a standard turbocharged engine here. Obviously, all of the engines in this segment have been extensively tested by the relative manufacturers for dependability, durability, stress testing, etc. But what's interesting about this 2.7-liter turbo is not the turbo part, not the truck part, but the displacement. Because it may not sound like a big deal to be 2.7 liters versus 2.3 liters, but this definitely feels like it has significantly more engine braking than we find in the Ford Ranger. Now, it's not a huge amount. I'm just putting this in first gear now, Engine's definitely revving up. We're not getting an enormous amount of engine braking. If you do plan on towing the maximum 7,700 pounds in your Colorado, you should definitely keep in mind that it's going to be harder to control that weight going downhill. As far as ride and handling, it is a little bit difficult to talk about that because, of course, it has been really windy and really rainy today, but this definitely has a solid and sorted ride to it. It's still going to feel like a truck, however. Out on winding mountain roads like this, thanks to that Altima for letting us pass here, you're certainly going to notice that we have a solid axle in the rear. Obviously, we have an independent suspension up front, so the front suspension's pretty well sorted, pretty well behaved out on the road, but you will notice that the rear end will hop over some broken pavement in the corners here and there. But this feels more refined and more modern than a Toyota Tacoma. Now, that's obviously not too hard because the Tacoma is far from modern. Now, that's expected to change very shortly in a really big way because by the time you're watching this video, the final versions of the Tacoma are likely rolling out to the places where we will be seeing them very soon. I don't have official confirmation from Toyota on that just yet, mind you, but the rumor mill says that we will probably be seeing the production Tacoma sometime in May. So it's really, really close. And if you want to know more about that, be sure to hit the subscribe button. I will have more details just as soon as I can get to them. So when I'm talking about Tacoma and future Tacoma, keep in mind, a lot of this is simply speculation because we just don't have any good details yet. At the moment, I'm around 3,500 feet. On the drive up here from San Diego, which is logically at sea level since it's right next to the sea, we averaged almost 20 miles per gallon in a Trail Boss model. Now that model had more aggressive off-road style tires than are on this Z71, so keep that relative fuel economy in mind. This particular model, however, has been averaging 14.5 miles per gallon over the last 230 miles and several different waves of journalists driving up from sea level, down, etc. So fuel economy wise, this is going to be substantially similar to the average half-ton truck because dimensionally and aerodynamics wise, this is really not that far off of the average half-ton truck. It is a little bit narrower inside, but it's almost as high off the ground. And as far as the tires go and the general things that impact fuel economy, it's just not far off those larger trucks. There has been some expectation, some speculation that we might see finally a hybrid entry in this segment from someone, but at the moment, if you want the most fuel-efficient entries in this segment, it's going to be something like the Gladiator with the diesel. You'll have to pay a lot for that diesel, though, keep that in mind, or the base versions of this are likely going to be one of the most efficient in this segment. Of course, you're going to have to give up a decent amount of power. A lot of folks have been asking about cabin noise and engine noise. This cabin is a little bit quieter than average, but keep in mind the Ford Ranger is getting pretty old and the Tacoma is positively ancient. So in that comparative landscape, I would say this is quieter than those options and also a little bit quieter than the Nissan Frontier. Now, on the other hand, we do get a little bit more engine grumble into the cabin than I had expected, even at lower RPMs like we're driving right now. Let's go back to this tachometer here. We're tootling along at around 1,700, 1,600 RPM, something like that, and you can definitely hear the burble in the cabin. It sounds a bit gruffer than what we find in the Silverado. Chevy said that some Silverado owners thought that the engine needed to sound a little bit more truck-like, but you will notice, if I floor it here briefly, it still sounds like a large four-cylinder engine. It still has that particular vibe. If I rev this engine up in first gear, it's definitely still a four-cylinder engine, but because of the larger displacement, it's going to feel, a little bit more grown-up, perhaps, than some of the smaller turbos. However, this is certainly the direction that this entire segment is going, and that actually even applies to some of the half-ton trucks out there, since this is the same engine in the Silverado. Bottom lining this out on the road is pretty logical and pretty easy. This is certainly more refined than the previous generation Colorado and Canyon, more refined also than the Frontier, and of course the Toyota Tacoma. If, however, you're looking for the most refined option in the segment, the one that's most focused on handling ability, daily driver livability, quiet cabin, etc., that would be something like the Honda Ridgeline, which I haven't mentioned up to this point, because the Ridgeline is not like the others. It's basically a pickup truck Honda Pilot. And it is the previous generation Honda Pilot, not the new one. So there are going to be trade-offs there. And one of those trade-offs is some of the drivetrain smoothness, the towing capability, the off-road capability, etc. It's not going to be where we see this, certainly not where we see the upcoming Colorado ZR2. But it is going to be a little bit more comfortable, and in some situations, perhaps a little bit more fuel efficient. If you want the ultimate in off-road capability, at the moment, you're probably going to want the Gladiator. But the upcoming ZR2, which we should see in the next few months, that is likely going to take the game right to Jeep's door. It's going to have a much more aggressive ground clearance than we find in this model. It's going to have unique front bumpers, rear bumpers, etc. Much more focused on off-road capability, but Chevy is saving some of those details for the future launch of the ZR2. We won't know exactly how it compares to the top-end versions of the Gladiator until then. Expect it, however, to be pretty price competitive. The last estimates that we've seen out of Chevy peg that model topping out at around $65,000 for the fully loaded model. That is, of course, the comparable model to the fully loaded version of the Gladiator, which is similarly expensive, so keep that in mind. But it is going to be probably the most capable truck in this segment. For the rest of us, however, there's a Colorado that's likely going to be one of the best values in the segment, so let's just dive into pricing. Starting at $29,200, the work truck version of the Colorado is quite simply an incredible value. You get the 11.3-inch LCD infotainment system, an 8-inch LCD instrument cluster, wireless CarPlay, wireless Android Auto, the Google connected services on this system, so the exact same software that we see in this Z71 is standard in every version of the Colorado. You also get keyless go. Those are some really great features. And what I like about the way that GM has done this pricing lineup is that they have made standard on the vehicle all the features that are a little bit tricky to upgrade, frankly. But if you want to do things like swap in different wheels, this is the same bolt pattern that we find on the Chevy Silverado. So all the Silverado wheels, they will work right here on the Colorado. If you want to upgrade your headlights, aftermarket, etc., those are all easier things to do than to graft on a Google connected infotainment system into the dashboard. That's going to be a lot harder to do aftermarket. So I think General Motors hit the nail right on the head with the content decisions on that base truck. Now, if you want a bit more, you could get the LT trim, $31,600. That's mainly going to focus on some creature comforts on the inside. The Trail Boss trim is the first, or I should say least expensive, off-road oriented Colorado. It offers a 2-inch lift, so a little bit more lift than we find in this ZR2. So a little bit more lift than we find in this Z71 for $37,000. Its interior is based off of the work truck interior, as I said before. Or you could get the Z71, which has the nicer interior parts, for $39,900, or you could go crazy when it's released and get that $46,800 ZR2. But what's also interesting about the Colorado lineup is that top-end model. The ZR2 is the model that a select number of people will be interested in. But a lot more people are going to want this Z71 trim, and this is under $40,000 starting. Yes, there are a few options you could add to it, but it's going to stick pretty close to that $40,000 maximum. That's a really narrow pricing window when you compare this to the elephant in the room, which is the Toyota Tacoma. If I were shopping for a mid-sized truck in America today, not only would the Colorado be at the top of my list, it's the model that I would get. And this might surprise you, but I would probably buy the base WT trim. Again, it starts at $29,200. I love the interior content, and I would certainly modify a few things. I would definitely upgrade the wheels. I would upgrade the headlights to full LEDs. I would probably try and swap out the steering wheel with one of the ones from a different model that had the leather wrapping, etc. But that still puts this significantly less expensive than any of the competition that would have bigger screens and some of those creature comforts on the inside. And of course, you can get the higher end tunes of the engine, so that base truck version could still tow 7,700 pounds. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section. What version of the Colorado would you get? Or are you eager to try the GMC Canyon? So as always, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification icon, and stay tuned for that video soon. See all of you next week. Okay, and then a focus on...